Welcome to Technically True, a podcast about public speaking, developer relations, and technology. I'm your host, Tane. Today I'm joined by my very good friend, PJ Hagerty. Hey, PJ.
Hey, how you doing today?
Very well. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, PJ works as the senior developer advocate at Mattermost. He also founded his own developer relations consultancy, DevRel.io. PJ, tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. And I should actually say thank you for having me back on the show because I did an earlier episode as well.
That's true.
What's there to say about me? I, was a developer for years. I got into developer advocacy kind of by accident one time. And since then, I mean, that was about 10 years ago. Since then, I've kind of been building on that idea and seeing how far we can stretch what developer relations really is and what it can do, how it can benefit a product or a company or an organization or a community. So that's been my focus. And I've worked everywhere from the smallest of startups of just, a few people, a handful of people trying to build something, to the largest of enterprise organizations. And you learn something at each place. You take something different out of it because no two places are the same. So I've tried to apply that as I keep moving forward to everything that I do.
That's awesome. Cool. So you founded your own DevRel consultancy and you have worked with many startups. So what sort of mistakes do you see startups make most often when beginning their developer advocacy efforts?
I like this question. I'm really glad that you asked this question. This is one of my favorite questions. And especially when I started working with startups that were very, very nascent, very, very young, and maybe not ready to move forward on their journey, but they were also backed by large venture capital firms or investors or angels or whatever. One of the biggest things was DevRel was a checklist item. And this is actually a huge mistake. When you're attempting to do DevRel or dev advocacy or whatever you're trying to do, to get yourself involved in a community, that's usually a positive effort. It's something that you want to work with the community to do, work to build, but it's not something that should be, another checklist like, hey, do we have coffee filters? Yes. DevRel? Yes. Also, yes. It doesn't work that way. You need to have something that you're giving back to the community to begin with. Chances are, and I know that we've talked about a bunch of things because we've known each other for a long time, but I think one of the things that a lot of startups try to focus on is using DevRel for sales. And that's kind of, they're usually told by their board of directors or by their investors, you need DevRel. DevRel will create a pipeline at the top of the funnel. We've all heard this terminology before. They'll start bringing you MQLs or SQLs or whatever QLs, qualified leads, X qualified leads. And that's not even the function of DevRel, but that is the outward appearance of what that is, especially to people who are investing money and want to get some kind of return on that investment. So to me, the biggest mistake is expecting to get started with DevRel, and that's going to create some sort of sales funnel or marketing funnel. And that's not really the purpose of what we do.
That's very true. And I think even when asking companies about like why they are starting a community, oftentimes you won't get a proper answer because there's real peer pressure in startups these days. Or because I thought we were supposed to do. I think that's also another good question to ask.
Exactly. And that's just like the checklist item. Like, why do you have DevRel? Well, I thought that was something we were supposed to do. It's like,
right.
If you don't have a purpose other than we're supposed to do that, chances are there's no reason to do it.
That's true. Right. And so you're a big fan of open source, right? And
yes, I am.
You're working for an open source company, and we even worked together before in the open source company. And when we take a look at these startups, this is a common scenario that there's a community version of the product, often open source, and then there's usually a SaaS product that's built around it, which generates revenue for the company. So how should advocacy teams handle this? Or rather, should there be a split of focus between these two entities?
I don't know if there should be a split of focus, but I think that what you need is transparency. I think one of the key things, especially when you have, and I'll break it down in simpler terms, you have a free product and you have a paid for product. Chances are that paid for product is going to have some features that the free product does not. And I think that being as transparent as possible is really the key to that. There will be times when someone who's using the free product says, hey, this feature isn't available. Why isn't it available? And if you have an open source version of the product, the answer is usually, well, if you feel the need, go ahead and build it. We have people that will help you answer those questions or learn to build an integration or a plugin or what have you to help you build the thing that you need to build. not a problem, but we're not going to build it for you. I mean, it's free. We need to focus on paying the people that are building the thing you're using for free, which is, I think, in my mind, it's a fair exchange. Um, at the same time, you're going to have features that are definitely needed by like large enterprise or larger scales companies that aren't just like simple communities with a few users here. You're going to have tons and tons, hundreds and hundreds of users on this side, on the enterprise side. And they're going to have needs that the community of 20 people doesn't have. So you're going to build things for them. And yeah, there's going to be a separation. I think so long as you are transparent and honest about that and say things like, listen, here's the features that are being built in the free version. Here are the features that are being built for the enterprise version. And yes, it could be that sometimes there will be an exchange, or there will be features built for both. That's going to happen probably more often than not. But by being clear that this is the mission, our mission is to deliver this product that is the greatest version of the product that we're building to everyone as equitably as possible. But we also need to make money because we live in a society that's, based on money. Right. As long as you're honest about that, I don't think you're hurting anything. I think it's when companies, especially people in DevRel, try to shadow walk the line or shade in the areas and say things like, oh yeah, no, we're 100% open source. We're dead. We have a full open source. The difference between open core and open source. Open source is not built to build SaaS out of. You can build a SaaS around it, but you don't build a SaaS out of it. And you and I, we worked at a company that kind of wrestled with that a lot. That will remain nameless. But at the same time, like, you can't have a fully open source thing and just say, well, if you're larger, we'll just charge you for it. You're actually disservicing the people who are willing to pay, who are willing to put up the money that, as an engineer, pays for you. As a DevRel, a dev advocate, these are the people that are paying the bills. So you have to be cognizant of what they want as well. Again, going back, the transparency, it shouldn't be a split. You should just be open and honest about everything that you're doing, and just say, hey, here's our enterprise features. Here's our free and open source features. Field questions, talk, communicate. It's not just a matter of, one person or a dev advocate going out there and saying, hey, this is what we're doing. It's also a matter of taking the feedback and bringing it back and saying, hey, I know that this is only an enterprise feature, but we've got 150 different communities asking for it. Maybe we should think about making this an open feature as well. If you keep that level of communication and transparency up, I think that you'll do well. If you try to shade things or try to keep things in the shadows, that's when things get a little bit more difficult, and you're not really servicing the community, which is what we do.
True. And we also once talked about like how if there's a split in focus that happens, there can be a misalignment between maybe the marketing and the advocacy teams in such cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that can cause issues where maybe marketing team is they have more in their interest to sort of increase the pull towards the SaaS product to increase their top of funnel. So maybe can you share some stories about cases where you have seen things go wrong?
Sure, absolutely. I have seen a lot of cases where the concept of we need to get more people in the funnel, or we need to build a stronger brand that's going to bring, market qualified leads in, supersedes the need to build a community around the product. When you and I and people who are in our industry, people who are dev advocates, go out to talk about what we're doing, we talk to developers, we talk to a certain level of people. We're not overly concerned with the CTO or the bottom line or the sales margin. With marketing, they are. Their job is to create that funnel. We assist them as much as we can, but if their goals are to, market technology the same way you market a used car, that's where the misalignment comes in. The classic marketing techniques of other industries don't work here. And you and I have talked about this to no end. Developers can smell marketing a mile away and they run from it. This is the reason why there's so many, programs out there for, when you do an event, trying to capture emails and things like that. And all of those things, like, try to avoid allowing for people's Gmails or example.com to be an extension that the email is a part of. Because when a developer goes to a conference, they don't want to give you their email address. They don't want to. There'll be a few very sincere inquiries, but it could still be that they're inquiring for themselves and not for their business. So they're not going to give you their business address. And this is a tough thing because marketing wants the real email. They want the contact. They want someone that they can send over to sales and have sales funnel them into Salesforce or whatever it is you use for your CRM. That's not what we do. So I think that the key is we should work actually more closely with our marketing teams to help them understand the idea of what DevRel is. And every time I've done this, it's worked out. I was working with one place where marketing thoroughly believed that the job of DevRel was to sell. And they did not understand why, like, I wouldn't go on a sales call. I wouldn't join, they were like, oh yeah, it'll be you, the salesperson and the sales engineer, which is usually someone who's like knows the more technical side. And you'll be there to kind of fill in the blanks and be the personality in the conversation. I'm like, no, I will not. That is not what I do. I'm not here to sell your product. And they're like, well, that's what we thought you did. And that's where the misalignment comes from. It's entirely perception, in the same way that when we're talking about what mistakes do startups make, when they say, oh, well, you're here to help us get more market qualified leads. That is ostensibly something that might happen from our activities, but that's not what we're here for. Again, transparency, communication, clarity. You make these things clear, you can avoid these huge potholes and make sure that marketing, I've worked with marketing teams that are actually super into the community and we're out there, they knew every member. They were like, hey, so-and-so, didn't I see you last time? We were hanging out. Yeah, we were doing those t-shirts. Oh, you got it with you. That's awesome. And taking pictures and having a good time, having personal relationships with people. That creates a whole lot more value than I got your email address, I gave you a t-shirt, and then we started spamming you. And I think that's kind of the disconnect between dev marketing and DevRel most of the time.
True. And taking a step back and talking about DevRel teams, or essentially building DevRel teams, we have seen a rise in the number of product-based tech startups hiring for DevRel teams earlier than they used to before. So
Absolutely.
how can companies assess if it's the right time for them to start building a DevRel team?
This is a tough question. It's kind of, so I don't know if you saw, but one of the people I've always looked up to, Aja Hammerly, who works over at Google, tweeted sometime last week, is it not true that the ultimate answer to every question DevRel is it depends? And yes, Aja is right. And yes, that's my answer to this question. It really does depend. It depends on who the market for your product is. It depends on whether or not it's open source or not, or open core. Can people work on it? It depends on what you've built it with. If you've built a huge product with .NET, well, DevRel isn't going to be the most important thing in the world for you. At the same time, you can find communities around things, but your first thing to do is to really look at, is there a community that already exists for the thing that I want to be a part of? At Mattermost, we're big Go people. We love Golang. We really enjoy it. And we kind of prescribe that to people when they want to build things around what we're doing. And that's cool. That's great. So one of the first things that we did was we were like, okay, well, how do we, what Go meetups are in areas where Mattermost people live? What Go conferences do our engineers want to go to? So it wasn't really about like, oh, well, we should sponsor that. It was like, we should participate in that. If you find you have communities that you have the time and experience to participate in, that's when you start looking at DevRel. It's not a matter of, I need this right away because, we built this in Ruby and now I need to be at every Ruby event. That's still looking at it as a marketing ploy. If you're not already a member of a community, your DevRel person has no place to go. And the answer to this, to go back to the mistakes that marketing makes, the answer to this is not to build your own meetup and have your DevRel person speak at every single one of them. That is not the answer. That is the wrongest possible thing to do. Cannot emphasize that enough. I really think that the key to knowing when to join a community is when you've stabilized, when you have a product, when you have something that people can use, even if it's in beta, but you're pretty solid on the direction of this product, that's when you look into hiring DevRel. Someone who can go out there and explain in plain terms exactly how the thing works, exactly why it was built, its purpose, the languages used, the technology used, someone who can translate all that and give it out to everyone else. That's when you need it. Before that, if you don't have a product and you don't have users, there's no need for DevRel. No one in DevRel, at least no one I've ever met, is like, yes, I would like to go out and explain vaporware to people constantly every day in the hopes that someday, 2 years down the line, the things that I've said make any kind of sense. No one wants that. No one wants to hear it. No one wants to see it. And definitely no one wants to deliver that on stage. So I think to be responsible, your first DevRel person shouldn't come until you have a solid product that is at the very least in beta, if not soon to be released. And then you can work out a plan on what communities you would like to be a part of and how you'd like to participate.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. And then moving on to the next stage, let's say you've assessed that it's the right time, you build a team. What does reasonable growth for DevRel teams look like? Like, what factors should it depend upon?
Again, this is a super complicated question, but I'll do my best to answer it. It depends. But seriously, what should DevRel growth look like entirely depends on the success of your product, the success of your interactions with the community, and the ability that you have to participate at a certain level. Generally, I've found that most startups do the right thing and they hire one DevRel person. And usually it's a community manager first. It's not necessarily an advocate who's going to go out and speak, or they hire these two people at the same time, because they kind of the community manager has a big responsibility in straddling the line between internal and external community, and that means managing the expectations of what we're doing and gathering the interest of the people on the inside of the organization, as well as looking at the people who are outside the organization and seeing how they can balance and complement each other. Right. So that's usually where you start with a community manager, then you add a dev advocate. Generally, this is probably good for the first year. This is probably all you need. You don't need to get much bigger than that, unless, for those of you who are familiar with startups, they talk about hockey stick growth. If your product sees hockey stick growth, then you might want to build a dev advocacy team pretty quickly. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go out and hire 5 people. It means you add things as you need them. So chances are when you start, you have your community manager who's kind of managing expectations on both sides, maybe doing a few events, running hackathons, or spotting issues where marketing can help out and advertise. You have your dev advocate who's doing events, speaking, maybe creating content, helping out with social media, doing a little bit of that. As you grow, you're going to find that you'll want to diversify or delegate those tasks. So you want your community manager who's just focusing on external things, events, hackathons, social media presence, things like that. You want to get a technical writer who's not only helping with documentation and things, but also blog posts and content, and maybe, helping with scripts for webinars and things like that. As you and I both know, the most important thing is for your best DevRel personality to start a podcast. Podcasts are super important. Nobody wants to go to webinars, listen to podcasts, folks. Podcasts for life. But in all seriousness, that first DevRel person or the first community manager is probably going to end up being your DevRel lead. The person who's going to say, okay, well, I understand what we've been doing for the past few years. I have the experience for the past year or two. I'm going to look at how we can expand, how we can build things. It doesn't always mean that person is the right fit, but hopefully they are. So then you have a team lead, you have a dev advocate or 2, depending on how much ground you want to cover. It might be that one handles open source and one handles enterprise, but they're both conferring on the same message. Or it could be that you have one that handles, developer events and one that handles more of like, the startup-y events, the web summits, the collisions, the things that are like, kind of VC focused, but also very startup focused. Right. You might have some kind of balance there. You have your community manager, you have your internal DevRel person who is taking the pulse of people inside the company, and they're responsible for delivering the feedback that all these other people are collecting to product, to development, to engineering, and hopefully to some of the higher ups, the C-levels, so that they understand what's really going on. As time goes, the DevRel function in your organization should be reporting more to that C-level, because they really need to, as time goes on in most startups, that C-level starts to get more and more divorced from the community, right, which is sad. And I know that that upsets a lot of founders. A lot of founders feel a horrible pull in the fact that they're no longer deep in the technology, they're no longer deep in the code, they're no longer deep in the community, and they feel like they would like to get back into that. So the best thing the DevRel team can do is be a part of keeping them informed, keeping them in the loop. So you're now looking at 2-3 years out, and we've got 5 or 6 people on a DevRel team. Again, that's dependent on growth and different things and communities and the situation with the product itself. I've seen organizations that have decided that the best thing to do is to go from having 2 DevRel people, a community manager, dev advocate, to having 40 DevRel people and what you get is 20 people standing around going, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, but hey, I'm getting paid a 6-figure salary. Cool. That's not, to me, that's not a positive thing for our industry. It's not a positive thing for DevRel. It's not a positive thing for the communities you're interacting in.
Right.
Focus on quality, not quantity. Are you able to continually deliver a quality presentation, a quality piece of information to your community? And if you are, then good. Worry about growth later. If you're not, consider growing. It's usually, I found in 10 years, I've been part of the cloud community, the Ruby community, Python, PHP, general open source, Linux, Kubernetes, the cloud, the whole cloud thing, again, coming back, things like platform as a service, DevOps, security, SecOps, DevSecOps. And now I'm working at a chat ops company that with a heavy focus on DevOps. So chances are, if you're doing DevRel long enough, you have enough experience, you can talk to a lot of different communities, because the flow doesn't change. The design doesn't change, just the message does. And if you're able to do that, you're able to balance that, you can grow a decent team and find more and more people as you move along, and it works out.
Right, I agree. I think like what you just mentioned about the overlap between maybe the community of your product and some other communities, this is just gold. Like if you create value there, your content or whatever you're creating is gonna advocate for your own product. Yeah.
Exactly.
And speaking of growing, like, can there be such a thing as too fast growth for DevRel teams? Like, what can be the dangers
100%.
there?
100% you can grow teams too fast. I think the dangers there is you end up creating personalities, not advocates. You get a lot of people who are focused on their own agenda and not on the community you're working with or the product that you're working for. You start to see a breakdown of the real community interaction, and also people canceling each other out. And I don't mean like the whole cancel culture concept, but when you're trying to give a consistent message, the more people you have trying to give it, we've all played telephone before. The more people that have to carry that message, the more likely that message is to break down. Yeah. So it's best to keep it tight, have a limited number of people who can deliver a succinct message. Granted, that totally changes when you look at something like a Microsoft or an IBM, where you have 100 different products. And so having like 20 DevRel people talking about Azure, that makes sense. You have a huge product and there's so many facets to it. Sure, do that. You're Microsoft. You've got all the budget in the world. You basically own most of Seattle. So that's fine. If you can afford to, do it. But the dangers really come in the fact that you end up a lot of times focusing on, that one famous DevRel person. And I hate saying famous DevRel person because it's the most ridiculous concept. But someone who's there for fame, for glory, to be a thought leader, which is another term that I really don't like, and not to actually deliver something of value to the community, more to be a face and a handshaker and a baby kisser, than actually delivering succinct and good information about technical products. That's the biggest danger that I see.
Right.
And unfortunately, I see that a lot right now. There's a lot of companies that are just hiring, like, oh, I saw so-and-so and people really like them, so let's hire them regardless of the fact they've never worked with our product and have no clue about the technology. Let's just hire them because they're a face. Ugh, yuck, gross. I hate it.
Yeah. Right. Taking a step into a different direction now, something that I'm personally quite curious about as well is, what does your DevRel toolkit look like? What sort of tools are you using for different things, maybe for measuring some metrics, maybe for communicating with the community?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, communicating with the community is easy. I work at Mattermost.
Right.
Mattermost is great at producing forums and ways for people to engage with each other. But this is my old timer speech. This is the old timer. Back in my day, all you needed was Twitter. But Twitter is still an amazing way to interact with a community. You can send out polls. You can, point out blog posts that you thought were interesting, even if they aren't yours. Even if they have nothing to do with your company, you can just be like, oh, did you see this thing about Docker? That's crazy. Or, a lot of people have been talking about Elastic and AWS lately.
Right.
Like, these are all interesting things that are going on, and they have to do with the things that I know and I'm interested in. So I can share those out, and the people in my community will look at them, hopefully, and engage. Always checking out what's going on in Hacker News to see what people are talking about. And I know that it is a wickedly toxic community, but a lot of times if you are very prudent with what subreddits you join, Reddit can be a great place to find out what's going on in the world of technology. Is it safe? No. Content warning. There's horrible people on Reddit. There's horrible people anywhere, but that doesn't make it a better place. That's not an excuse at all. But that's one of the things that I often turn to as I look and I say, all right, if I go into the programming subreddit, what are people talking about today? Oh, functional programming. That's an interesting subject that I'd like to know more about. One of the biggest parts of my toolkit is my ability to read. It's really what it's all about. It can stimulate an idea for a talk or give me an idea for a hackathon or whatever. It's being a member of the community, and that's the key thing. The number one thing in my DevRel toolkit is my membership card, which I mean, metaphoric membership card, to be part of a community. And the more open the community, the better. And I think that's key. Other things, good microphones, a great pair of headphones, especially right now. Like the literal toolkit is, I always make sure that I have adapters. I always make sure that I use Keynote for my presentations. I am a Mac user. The main reason why I use Keynote is because it is more dependable than PowerPoint. Sorry, I know that's controversial. And I do not like Google Slides. I've seen fail so many times. It's not even worth it. But that's me. That's my personal preference. When it comes to DevRel Toolkit, build the things that you're comfortable with. In the same way that when you're as a coder, maybe you like VS Code, maybe you prefer Atom. They're really the same thing. Maybe you like Vim, maybe you like Emac. Fight amongst yourselves. But the thing is, you should be comfortable in your environment. You should be able to make your terminal look the way you want it to, make your slides look the way you want it to. Be comfortable whenever you're working with the community, because the DevRel is not being, tricked or no gotcha moments. It's about being comfortable so you can discuss the things the community cares about. So find a way to make yourself comfortable and go with it. That's my toolkit. That was the most esoteric, vague toolkit you could possibly imagine. But also Adidas sneakers. There's your number one DevRel toolkit piece. Good arch support. You can walk in them all day.
Wise words, PJ.
I do what I can.
Right. So any last words of wisdom for maybe founders or startups looking to make their first DevRel hire?
Yes. For founders and startups looking to make your first DevRel hire, consider this. There are many people out there that can talk about your product, that can talk about what you do, that can talk to the communities that you're a part of. Look to those communities to find someone who's already there. Your product might not be as unique as you think it is. Your product is actually less important than the people that you're going to deliver that product to. Look for someone who's willing to work with a community, to build a community. Look for someone who maybe looks a little out of the ordinary. Someone who isn't necessarily like me, a white guy with a beard that can go on stage and talk tech. Make sure that they can talk to the community, but make sure that it's someone who stands out a little bit. Not just because they're willing to talk about it, but also because they're into what you do. They're into the community and what you can do for that community. That's your first DevRel hire. Someone who's passionate about the things that you do because you're doing the things that their community wants you to do.
Right. I think, passion is something that it's difficult to fake during the interview processes. So
absolutely.
Definitely good thing to assess. Right.
But yeah,
PJ,
that's my key. That's the key right there.
Right. Well, PJ, thank you so much for joining us. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me. I hope to be back again. I want to go for 3. I want to go for 3 today.
We're going to do that. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time.